Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about communication, leadership, diversity, and all the challenges that come with being a leader in today's business world. Before I get to my fascinating conversation with Nancy Geenen, I'd like to invite you to see where your presentation skills are strong by checking into our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where in just 4 minutes, you can see where you are strong with your presentation skills and where perhaps a little bit of support could get you the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. And if you score high enough, you will win a free 45-minute consultation with me. So take 4 minutes and try. My guest today is Nancy Geenen. She's a friend and someone I've been trying to get for quite some time, a very busy person. She is the CEO and founder of Flexability, which is a company that helps management and it helps companies create outstanding teams. Her official bio is that she's a teacher and a strategist. She loves watching teams succeed because they trust and communicate fearlessly. Nancy's known for her witty and humorous storytelling, and she leans into her core values, which are put people first, keep your promises, and lead with abundance, bravery, and creativity. Nancy's book, The Advantage of Other, is available for pre-order at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and through your independent bookstore. And maybe by the time you're listening to it, it will be published. There's another episode in the queue with Nancy talking about the book. So be sure to stay tuned. And now to talk about the advantage of being other, our guest, Nancy Geenen. Nancy Geenen, thank you so much for joining us on Speakers Who Gets Results.
Thanks for having me, Elizabeth. It's really a pleasure to actually have this conversation with you.
Well, thank you. You are one of the people it took me a while to get you because you're so good. You've got such cool things to say. I'm really excited to have this. Before we start, let me ask you, who would be your dream interview? If you could interview someone who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
You know, I know in interviews, you're never supposed to say, that's a great question, but it really is a great question.
That's why I ask it. Yes, thank you.
I was thinking about different eras, and I'm a kind of an amateur student of history. I was thinking about, Indira Gandhi would be good. I would love to, interview one of the empresses of China or, somebody really like a famous woman who did great things in her time and was achieving great things. And I thought, oh, wow. And I was talking to my daughters about it. And the person I'd love to interview is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Because I want to get to not only what she did and how she affected our women's history and the civil rights movement and all of the people that she was involved with in and during her career while raising her children and doing all those things. But also, I would like to find out how she communicates. How does she communicate with the rest of the justices? How do they negotiate?
This is Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was the subject of the movie A Question of Sex, right? That was on the basis of sex, something like that.
Yep.
Yes, which if you haven't seen it, you must. It's a wonderful movie. So yes, please go on. How she would communicate.
How she would communicate with her peers, how she communicates up and to the sides, and because that's where great leadership lives. And so I was trying to tie it into kind of your themes and some of the earlier podcasts I watched to prepare, and thinking about how do you sit at this round table where essentially everyone has an equal voice, but there's a diversity of thought, there's the diversity of experience, there's a diversity in just representation. And how do you achieve decisions? Because that's what leaders do. And in that respect, I thought that would be a fascinating conversation to have. And then I was thinking, who else would I put at that dinner table? And maybe Condoleezza Rice, who was in the Bush administration, and bringing again a diversity of women
who was a Black woman Secretary of State.
Right. And just,
and Republican.
Yes. Just be so fun to have people who are already good listeners talk. And I just want to be the person who pours the coffee and is just sitting there going, and what else, and what else, and what else. So that would be my pick or picks.
I think, well, the two of them, that would be great. I once saw a live interview with the great mezzo-soprano Brigitte Fassbender and the great mezzo-soprano Christa Ludwig. And Christa Ludwig was sort of in a bad mood that day, and she was giving short answers. And Brigitte Fassbender got up and walked around the table and poked Christa Ludwig in the shoulder. And Madame Ludwig said, "What was this?" And Brigitte Fassbender said, "Well, they said if I just let you go, you would start telling stories. So I was looking for the on button." And I thought, that's like an interviewer's dream, is to just hit the on button and say, "Okay, go, tell me stories."
Yeah.
So Nancy, tell me stories. You have a very interesting company, which, how do you describe what Flexability does? Flexability, yes, with an A, is really about helping leaders, not titled leaders. I mean, in both titled and intrinsic leaders in their organizations, build high-performing teams. That's what we do. We do it in a variety of different ways. And so I was talking to a leader of a small college yesterday who was trying to figure out how to mesh her leadership team, who are all good managers. And we just think about how she does that. And one of the questions that surprised her, I said, "What kind of leader are you, and how do you communicate?" And that self-awareness piece, she goes, "I hadn't really been thinking about that in terms of building a team." I said, "Well, you're part of the team." Yeah.
You can say you might be a coach where you're just getting the skill players in the right place. And interestingly for you, Elizabeth, she was a professor of music and has been all over the world. And I said, I don't know a lot about music, but I know how to listen to a great opera, a great symphony. And when you have all the different skill players really at the top of their game, they know they matter, even if they're not in the first chair. There's a moment of silence where the audience sits in awe, as do the musicians. And that's the definition for many. I'm a sports person, so I can do, all the sports analogies, but they don't often work for everyone in the leadership community. But this music, the symphony one, everybody has experienced that moment of a great performance. And there is that moment of just, it almost makes you cry. It's so beautiful. It's just so quiet. And everyone in that room experiences it. That's what we try to do with business leaders.
How do you manage the expectations? I do know that with opera, so 30 years in the opera, it is the most complicated of the performing arts. There are so many moving parts, and you are doing it live right there. and you may have 3 people on stage singing, but you've got 500 people on the payroll that night.
Yeah.
It all has to work together. And you learn to live for the moments where it all works. Mm-hmm. But you never get the whole thing that works. It doesn't all work all the time. How do you aim for that, but manage the expectation that that's going to be the exception rather than the rule?
We really talk about performance levels. And it's shocking to hear that most people are performing at or about 51, 52, 53%. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much there. I think there's that, I'm aging myself, but there's that George Carlin quote that people work just hard enough not to get fired. Mm-hmm. And so what we're really trying to do is elevate a percentage. It doesn't matter what the number is. It just matters what the starting point is, to a point where everyone in that organization, those 800 people on the payroll, are all engaged in trying to get to 80, 90%. Every once in a while, Olympic athletes, I want to say prima donnas, but
that's all right. The first lady. Yep.
The first lady, all of them are looking for that zone performance where it's so much in the moment that you aren't really aware of what's happening. And so when we move expectations, what we're trying to do is say, does everybody know what the goal is? What the bullseye is? What is done? What are the results look like? We're never going to get to 100%, and there is no 110%. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a common mistake that we try to correct right away. Just work a little bit harder. I grew up in that. If you work hard, you tell the truth, you're going to do great. Well, that's true, but there's no more than 100%. Because then you're probably not taking care of yourself. And that means that your performance will diminish over time because of burnout. So we're talking about engagement. Mm-hmm. And if we can get every person, the grip, the guy who pulls up the curtains at the right time and at the right speed, the soprano, the tenors who come in, and I'm way out of my depth here. I did some studying, but I'm way out of my depth. If we're talking softball or football or golf or tennis, I can do a lot. But if you can get everybody to know that they belong in their performance, the job they do is absolutely critical to get to that 80, 90% for that experience. And they all experience it. They're there because they love it. They love opera. They're there because they've seen those moments. And the more that everyone feels, and this is the belonging piece, and this is how we, really teach DEI upside down. If you can get to inclusion where everyone knows their value, they know they belong, they know that the one time they do one thing in a 3-hour performance, it makes a difference. They're seen and heard. That's high performance as a team.
I love that. And actually, I just had an idea to play around with the metaphor here with sports, live sports, and live performance. Last Christmas time, we went to Radio City Music Hall in New York City to watch the Christmas spectaculars with the Rockettes doing their can-cans and so forth. And that's impressive. It's very impressive. It's a great big show. It's a great big theater. But the other thing that really impressed me were the functional equivalent of the people in the basement who are getting their dirt under their fingernails. At Radio City, they have 6,000 seats, and they get in about 30 to 40 minutes. They get 6,000 people into that space, find their seats, and then 90 minutes later, they get 6,000 people out of there and ready for the next 6,000 seat. Because in the height of holiday time, they do a show every 2.5, 3 hours. And so I was thinking about that, and I thought, wow, the logistical skill involved in that. It's like the logistical skill nowadays. You have, on-time delivery. So Nancy, talk to me a little bit. You were talking about doing diversity, equity, and inclusion upside down.
Yeah. Or backwards.
Yeah, or backwards. Okay, just go through that sequence for me, please.
When we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we use working definitions, because depending on who we're talking to and what we're doing, what the challenges are in the organization, what the leadership and the organization wants to achieve. But there are 3 levels of organization. There's the company, there's the leadership team, or the teams, and then there's the individual level. And we believe in order to create psychological safety, belonging, that's where high performance teams live. You have to start with inclusion, because it's the impact. It's how I feel, how I respond. I'm kind of like I'm a music symphony geek. I have music on all the time. I'm kind of a neuroscience geek. So again, it's, I know just enough to be dangerous. But what we want to do is we want to get every individual on the team into a place where they feel seen and heard, and they know they're heard because they're seen. So inclusion is about impact. It's how I feel I belong, how I feel I matter, how I feel what I do brings value. Talking about equity, that's more at this company level and leadership team level. We're looking at systemic process, procedures, documentation to say, in a less overt way, but sometimes very overt, we belong. The simple thing being, do we put identity labels, gender labels in our email signature? Really easy one to do, costs no money, but it identifies to anybody on the outside or to those who feel othered that, this might be a place of inclusion and belonging. And that's systemic, that's equity. We really think about equity as creating opportunities for everyone in the organization to thrive, and every individual to thrive individually, because we're not all the same.
Define for us, again, for those who don't talk about this all the time, the difference between equity and equality.
So equality, there's a great visual, and for the blog, I'll give you the slide for it. Equality is you give everybody the same box to see over the top of the fence. Equity, you give different individuals different size boxes depending on their needs. In the workplace, if you're short in this graphic, you get a taller box. If you're in a wheelchair, you get a box that has a ramp. So it's creating opportunities for the individuals to thrive based on who they are and how they present. In the workplace, we think about it as tools. You can give everybody the same computer, but if you have those who have low vision or low hearing, if you don't always additionally provide them software that describes pictures for low vision, or that has closed captioning for your hybrid meetings, you are not providing tools where someone who, like me, who has low hearing can thrive. I miss stuff along the way. Missing things creates, now we'll go back to psychological safety and the inclusion piece. The impact on me is I don't belong. I'm too much on the outside and some of these things cost almost nothing. One of the greatest examples of the 20th century of kind of creating inclusion and around the disability world is curb cuts.
Curb cuts are when the curb is cut down so that there's a ramp down to from the curve down to street level, which means that if you're in a wheelchair and you're crossing the street in your wheelchair, you can actually get up onto the sidewalk.
And creating that, it was a hugely expensive change for cities, infrastructure ways. It cut down UPS workers' comp back claims by over 70%. So tools, even though they're for, say, the disability world, somebody who has mobility mobility issues can't get up over the curb without help, create wonderful opportunities for others. And that's where we say that it makes good business sense to think about this. You want all of your team members giving their very best, feeling engaged. That's inclusion. So that gets you to equity, which is processes, procedures, documentation, lightweight doors.
And also to just communicate. So you're talking about UPS back problems. That means that the person who's delivering the packages can use a hand truck,
right,
and roll the packages on and off the sidewalk. It also means, as you talk about maternal bias here, is that mothers with kids in strollers or baby carriages can get up and down, with mothers in prams, which is something that, since Western business was created by men, and really, it's one of the things that didn't occur to anybody until there was an issue. Until enough people complained.
Right.
Yes.
So that gets us back to inclusion. I matter, I belong. Somebody's paying attention to giving me the tools, which is the equity, different than the same tool. It's the tools that I need to thrive in this workspace. And then diversity really being the metric or the measurement as to, do we have representation at the table? And it's at basically the decision-making table. It's who we invite into the conference room. It's who we invite to mentor and bring with us to business meetings. The hardest part about current DEI and some of the backlash that we're seeing is, in a privately held company, let's say, you have somebody who's worked for you for 13 years. They are ready to move up into the executive team leadership. And here comes diversity, equity, and inclusion following the George Floyd murder, which was the murder in Minneapolis, which got, I think, worldwide attention. Not the first, certainly not the last, but did create a movement that along with Black Lives Matter, which had started a while before that, but created this idea that, this slot no longer is going to go to this 13-year veteran in my company. I'm going to bring somebody in who's diverse in representation, in identity. We have the big 8 identities. We all live in those identities, and leaders are in this conundrum. That's kind of that diversity metric. And we have to decide as a company, how do we get the diversity of thought, the diversity of representation, identity, the diversity of lived experiences to create a company that will be sustainable and will thrive, and where we will all really understand the mission, the values, where we're going, why we're here. Because it's funny because it goes back to some of the business thought leaderships in the 70s and 80s to say, if you take care of your employees, they will take care of your consumers, your customers, your clients. But how we define now taking care in the 21st century is much broader. And we're realizing, people say, well, why does it really matter? Well, it matters because you want a company that is sustainable for the future, because your workforce is between 18 and 52, and they grew up in an environment where equity and inclusion matter. And they're going to choose with, with their pocketbooks, the brands that support their values, their morals, those things. And so in the United States, we are experiencing a very divisive political economy, and it's creating this kind of backlash, but it's mostly about politics, not about progressive values in the sense of this equity and inclusion. And I think if we think about it, you bring it away from this worldwide view of politics and you bring it down to the individual, the team, the company, great change can happen that doesn't have to be threatening and dangerous.
I love that. And, I've all along, certainly in recorded history, it's people have tried to get power by making other people afraid and designate someone as the other And I was just recently, I'm a history geek too. So I was just recently looking up the 30 Years' War, which is one of the ways of defining it was Catholic versus Protestant. And it matters to U.S. history because it was the mid-17th, the mid-18th century that these divisions sent a lot of people leaving Europe and fleeing to the New World, where they could worship the way they wanted, so they could live, where they wouldn't be persecuted, basically. Right. And then for the framers of the Constitution, it was just Catholic versus Protestant, which I remember in my childhood hearing people who said, well, you can't elect John F. Kennedy because he's a Catholic. America will never do that. And it became no big deal, but it was one of the defining divisions for my parents' generation. And then people who want power can say, oh, well, that's the other person. And if you look about former Yugoslavia, Serbia and Croatia, that, Serbs and Bosnians and Croats used to live together until the politicians said, oh, no, you have to hate your neighbor because they are other.
And that's why, when we talk about these big generalizations, we have to bring it down to your neighbor. Still in Northern Ireland, we're still seeing those same kind of neighborhood by neighborhood pieces of division. But in business, the mission, we look at what is the mission of the company? Why do you exist? And kind of it's a Simon Sinek, what's your why in the golden circle? And then you can get to your how and your what and your how. And in business, we're all there for hopefully a single purpose to help a client, a customer, a consumer live better somehow. And those value-driven companies are the ones where we're going to see the most belonging. We're going to see the high-performing teams, because there is this. I'm going to shift on you a little bit here and say there is this attention paid to stakeholder primacy versus shareholder primacy.
Is that still happening? It seems to me that since the 1980s, it became all about the shareholders.
It has. And I think in the 21st century, what we're seeing now, again, we keep pushing, is in the United States, there are companies who have legally and organized themselves around a benefit corporation, a B Corp. And Patagonia being probably the best known brand in Europe, Danone, which now owns Ben & Jerry's. There's a couple companies now in India that are going towards that, and then I've lost their names at this point, but they were colleagues of mine when I was at Harvard, and really focusing around this isn't just to make shareholders' value go up or to make and to increase the value of the company. It's actually going around these UN ESG, but the environment, the social, the governance goals to create a better world, both for the individual, for the community, for the business, for the country, and then ultimately for the world. Again, always thinking in this pyramid. But what we really recognize in building high performance teams is this idea that it starts with the individuals. And there's that great cartoon where the CFO and the CEO are talking, and I've actually got one now of two women that I just did in a keynote that I gave a couple of weeks ago, where the CFO says, "I'm not sure we can afford to invest in all this education and training and upskilling for our employees," and the CEO saying, "How can we not? How can we not?" And that I think,
or if you think education is expensive, try ignorance.
Well, and again, I keep, people say, well, why is it important? Pew just published a study from February of 2021, And I'm really about rainbow washing. So we're getting ready to go into the LGBTQ plus all the other letters that I can never SIA to something, something. And then there's, it's long now, about rainbow washing, or about women's history washing, or about Latinx washing. Like for a month, we're going to pay attention to pride and to the LGBT community. It makes a difference because in America, the LGBTQ buying power is it's a little over $3 trillion. The spend is less, but it gets spent in companies that are not just showing up for a month in June, that their policies, their procedures, their benefits are all there 12 months a year. And I think so. We're going to see, I'm anxious. It's the 31st of May today.
We're recording on the 31st of May. That's correct.
Yep. June's going to start with Pride Month, and everybody's going to show up with their rainbow logos and their flags. And we support the LGBT community, the trans community, which are really at risk right now. We're seeing, Florida and Texas really put the trans community at risk, putting women's health at risk. How many of those companies are actually going to say, it's not just a flag for us. Here's what we do 12 months a year. Those are the companies where that a little over $3 trillion just in America, that spend is going to go. And now, because we have paid attention to this, I think that spend is going to be important to business leaders who want to reach a consumer that maybe they haven't spent time on before. And, here again, we're seeing that backlash. Uganda just passed extraordinarily devastating legislation around the LGBT community. And so this is a worldwide issue. And, we're going into June in America, which is Pride Month, and we've got to pay attention to more than just the flag waving.
This brings me to another question. I always think of it as a pendulum, and we have gotten better. I was just writing an article about, things are improving, and things that broke down into you're either this or that, the either or has now become, well, it's not that simple. You had a great phrase about identity. When we were doing our preparation call, I was asking you about how we fit along the spectrum of, LGBTQIA plus and all the various letters.
Right.
So many people, especially in the younger generations, are saying, I'm not just one thing.
Right.
Or maybe I'm not just one thing my whole life. Where is there a place for the spectrum of identity? And you had a great phrase about identity being a circle. So
yes. So
talk about that, please. I want to hear.
Yeah, we think about this as there's really the big 8 identities, which are race, culture, socioeconomic status, religion, gender, sexual orientation. Oh, I won't get all 8. But we do an exercise with leadership teams, and especially in middle management teams, to say, okay, here's the circle. And again, we'll give you the slide to use. How many of these different identities do you hold? Almost without exception. There were a couple. Everybody's in every slice of that pie. And their identities, and then there's what do you lead with? Well, you lead with how you present. I present pretty much white woman, privileged, just by you're looking at me. Your brain's going, yep, I got this, and I'm predicting you're exactly like this, and this is how you're going to act. Our brains predict our feelings, basically, whether we're, and with our biases. Our critter brain says safe or danger. Lions and tigers and bears, oh no, I'm safe. Athlete, perhaps. And so we look for commonalities that we can then have a conversation. How do we know you? And there's lots of exercises that we do. But when we look at that circle of identities, we're never just one thing. And in that is this kind of lived identities, which has to do with experience. And what we're trying to do is get leadership to realize that we have so much more in common than we have differences. And what we want to do is, as leaders, is be curious about those differences, because there's great learning that happens in that space of curiosity, in that space of a new experience. And it's really not unsafe. You aren't in danger, especially in a workspace. It's not to be reckless, but it is to be curious and to really say, you know what, I didn't get that quite right. A lot of times I have a group I work with, and I'll start a topic and I'm just trained Midwest values, ladies and gentlemen. And I have a group that every time I do it, I'm almost trained out of it, but it takes practice. I do this for a living. And just like the musician, you don't get to that, first chair symphony without thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of practice. DEI is a skill. We aren't born to this. We're born to say we're different. Our brains, not our minds, our brains are trained to keep us safe, breathing, blood pumping. That's 80% of what goes on in the whole piece that is the critter brain. And what we have to do is we have to interrupt that trigger response, which you can't change. You can't get unbiased. You can recognize, oh, I have bias. I can change here. I can have a different response. And that's where mindfulness comes in, where we started at the top of the hour. Mindfulness comes in to say, I can interrupt that trigger. I can be curious. Tell me more. I saw, when I said this, I saw your face and it looked like it didn't hit you just right. Am I reading that right? I'm not telling you how you feel. I'm asking. I saw something that didn't make sense to me. Can you tell me what you were thinking? Can you help me as a leader get better? Because you have experiences. And that's where this diversity really starts to become a powerful economic force in a company to say, oh, yeah, I get that. Hey, and the apology comes from not, I'm sorry that you feel that way. It's that I'm sorry I didn't get it, and I will do better next time. But I'm inviting you to correct me as we go along. I'm inviting that insight, not feedback, not constructive criticism, not all that stuff, but I'm inviting your insights to help me make sure that you have the opportunities, you have the tools, and that I value, I see you, I hear you. It's an avatar kind of thing, in the movie. Kind of like, it's a culture shift. And it's bumpy. And it takes time. It's not, hey, we can do 3 trainings a year for middle management and everything's going to be better. It's not. In fact, it might make it worse. It has to be a long-term commitment.
Do you have a standard second sentence when you say, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen? Do you have a standard follow-up?
I do. And I say, sometimes depending on the audience, it depends on whether I use a curse word or not. Sometimes I say darn, sometimes I say damn. Give me a moment to have a redo, because I'm better than that.
And then what do you say?
Colleagues, friends, folks, you as an audience. It just depends, it depends on what is it, a big group, a little group, is it somebody who's going to raise their hand and go, Geenen, you did it again. And I'm going to be like, oh, yep, I did. But I own it. And I ask in a kind of I kind of use humor. I ask in kind of a cute, humorous way. All right, let's start over. Back up that truck, take a deep breath, let go whatever you just felt. That's a smaller group, sometimes a bigger group. Get oxygen to your brain. Colleagues, I'm here today to talk to you about.
That's actually, it's a good speaker trick to say, to make the mistake and then correct it, because it draws attention to the issue.
Yep.
And it sets you up as basically it sets up your talk, right?
It does. I can't say I use it as a prop. I really don't. I don't think it's a good thing to do as a prop because I think it's inauthentic. I don't know how many of your listeners have Apple TV and watch the Ted Lasso show, but I binge on it every so often. And I was actually watching it yesterday, and the season 3, the 9th episode has a coming out scene for one of the players, Hughes,
who comes out as gay.
As gay, yeah. The audience knows he's gay mostly throughout. But the scene, there's not much in season 3 about Ted Lasso. But the scene is Ted Lasso does a terrible example of somebody being othered by liking a different sports team. Chiefs versus Broncos for Americans. It would be kind of like Man United versus Real Madrid kind of thing. Big sports teams. And if you're in England and you like Real Madrid, no one watches with you. Yes. Just don't. Can't wear somebody else's colors. Terrible analogy Ted Lasso uses in the locker room. And Hughes, who is the gay soccer player, says, "Coach, did you just use a sports analogy to talk about the difference about being gay?" He goes, and Ted Lasso goes, "Yeah, I did. That was really American football, a fumble on the field. Let me go back." Because the point he was trying to make is that being passive to say, hey, somebody says that comes out, I'm gay. Great, we don't care. It doesn't make a difference to us, is harmful. And that's the point that Ted Lasso is trying to make, to say, hey, we do care about you. We care about you so much that you don't have to carry this feeling of otherness by yourself anymore. And it's about 22, 25 minutes into this episode, but it was one of the strongest messages that I've seen in modern media about how we approach someone who reveals, I have mental health issues. Oh, you don't know, but I have low hearing. I can't do that because I can't climb stairs. When we bring ourselves forward, I have MS, I have diabetes. When we bring ourselves forward with those, what have before been seen as weaknesses, and we say, we care. What do you need? How can I help? I'm inviting you to ask. That's the most powerful sense of belonging there is. And so I think, if I came in to get one message through to all of the listeners, it's really care. Care enough to ask, care enough to be curious, care enough to learn something about somebody you've known for 20 years that has just revealed something very authentic, very heartfelt, because they trust you. The other side of that story is Hugh's best friend, Isaac, the characters will be clear, is really angry. And Hughes thinks it's because he's gay and he doesn't like him. And Isaac is angry because Hughes didn't trust him enough to tell him before. So for me, again, going into Pride Month, going into what we're seeing in America with the trans community, care enough to be curious.
What if you ask and they're really tired of being the example? And they say they're tired of talking about it.
The burden of education of the other. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a really, really tough interaction. And again, it comes back to saying how you ask. Rather than saying, educate me, what's a good resource for me? Where do I go to learn about this stuff? Can you give me, a book list? Can you point me to a podcast? I don't need you to sit down and tell me your life experience, because maybe there's not enough trust for us to do that. But realize that I'm trying to figure this stuff out. I'm being vulnerable. So the vulnerability lives with the speaker who's trying to learn, not with the other. The other experiences that harm every day, and it's cumulative. that burden is extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
But if I come with in sitting in true integrity and true vulnerability, saying, I don't get it, I want to learn. Can you point me to some resources so I can start to read? And then may I ask questions about what I'm reading? Mm-hmm. Because it's not the what did I do wrong, or how do I do better? It's may I ask you if you will help me? Mm-hmm. Not to ask for the invite to come in and say, I'm interested about this. And it may not be you. It may be that you are so sick and tired of talking about what it means to be an angry Black woman in the workspace. I got it.
Yeah. It's got to be okay if they say no.
Yeah. And you have to walk away and say, you know what? Okay, thanks. I'm going to work on this. If you think of something, send me an email with some books or some podcasts or something I can read about. Mm-hmm. And again, coming back to speakers who get results, I think about it as communication. I keep bringing it back to great leaders are really good communicators because every pore, every expression, every part of their body shows that vulnerability and that interest in that curiosity. And that's where, for me, great leadership lives.
So that's where great leadership lives. That is a great line to end on. Nancy Geenen, thank you so very much. This was fascinating. I could listen to you for hours. I think I have to get you back one of these days and talk further about this sort of thing. Thank you so much for being our guest. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host. If you had a good time and enjoyed this conversation, please tell your friends, subscribe to us on YouTube, subscribe to us on whatever podcast app you use. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That's the one that matters. And tell your friends. I have so much fun bringing in really smart, interesting people like Nancy. I hope that the rest of you come listen to the rest of us. And in the meantime, I will see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.